Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. Today I'm talking about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, published in 1820, and I'm comparing it with the Tim Burton movie Sleepy Hollow, which was released in 1999. And then I will also be talking about the Disney version of this, which was released in 1949 and is titled The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And maybe it's my upstate New York roots kicking in, but the story of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow has always been a Halloween favorite of mine. I grew up watching the cartoon, which I loved, but then when I was around 12 or 13, I saw the Tim Burton movie for the first time and it terrified me. It made me scared to go to bed for so long and it haunted me. And yet, even though it scared me, there was also something about it that I was drawn to, partly because I was a fan of Johnny Depp, but also Tim Burton. But yeah, so even though it scared me so bad, there was something about it that made me want to watch it again. And then once I became a high schooler, it no longer scared me. And then from that point on, it has become a Halloween favorite of mine. And so considering how much I love Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman, you would think I would have covered this sooner, but for some reason, it took me 4 years of Why the Book Wins to finally get into Sleepy Hollow. But regardless of how long it took me, what matters is that I'm finally covering it now. And something I learned when reading this book and doing a bit of reading, I had thought that Washington Irving created the legend of the Headless Horseman. But no, this was an existing legend that he knew about, and then he created this story with Ichabod Crane. And the book, which we'll get into, I was a little disappointed by. And so to be disappointed by the book, and then on top of that, find out that Washington Irving, you can't even credit him with coming up with the Headless Horseman lore, it just was kind of all the more disappointing in some ways. But he did turn it into the legend of Sleepy Hollow when he created the character of Ichabod Crane, which, by the way, there is a family called the Van Tassels. And apparently in real life, there was a real Hessian horseman who was killed and his body was buried by the real Van Tassel. So, you know, Ichabod Crane is a made-up character, but there are certain other people in this story who were real. But yeah, Washington Irving, we do have him to thank for just cementing the Headless Horseman in Sleepy Hollow and Ichabod Crane as these iconic features of Halloween. And for this episode, I am first going to talk about the book and the Disney movie because those two are very similar. And then from there, I will move on to the 1999 film. And we are also just getting right into spoilers right off the bat. So in the book and movie, Ichabod Crane is a gangly school teacher who arrives in Sleepy Hollow, and he gets to know the town members, and he becomes quite taken with a young woman named Christina Van Tassel. She is very beautiful, for one. In the book, she's described as being as plump as a partridge and ripe and melting and rosy-cheeked as a peach. But what he also likes about her is the fact that her father is a wealthy farmer, and if he marries Christina, once the father dies, all of that wealth will go to Ichabod. However, there is another local man who is already hoping to marry Christina, and his name is Brom Bones, and he is loved by the town for his funny pranks and his silly antics, and he does not like Ichabod showing up and winning the people over and stealing his girlfriend. But he and the town members all know that Ichabod is very superstitious and he believes in all things supernatural, and while in Sleepy Hollow, he is told the story of this headless Hessian horseman who haunts Sleepy Hollow, and then one night after a party at the Van Tassel home, he is chased down by the Headless Horseman, and in the morning, Ichabod has disappeared, and all that is left of him is his hat, which is found beside a shattered pumpkin. And Ichabod is never heard from again. And the people of Sleepy Hollow don't investigate into they don't try to find out for sure what happened to him. And we read in the book that because he was a bachelor and was in no one's debt, that's why no one cares. And that's why they don't try to figure out what happened to him. And so some people say that he was spirited away with the horseman, but then others claim that he just left Sleepy Hollow and he's just living a happy life somewhere else. But Brom, he does end up marrying Christina, and whenever people mention Ichabod around him, Brom always has a sly smile and a hearty chuckle, which leads us to assume that he dressed up as the Headless Horseman and scared Ichabod away. And this is where the cartoon and the story differ, because in the story, yeah, it's heavily implied Brom dressed up as the Headless Horseman. But yeah, the Headless Horseman definitely seemed to be real in the cartoon. And with the 99 movie, I am first going to start out talking about the things that are similar between this movie and the original story. So for one, our main character is Ichabod Crane, and he is new to Sleepy Hollow. And in the movie, he again falls in love with Christina, although in the movie, he actually falls in love with Christina Katrina. He's not after her for her money. There is actually someone else in the movie who is after the Van Tassel fortune, but yeah, it is not Ichabod. And here too we have Brom Bones, who is Katrina's beau, who again is very upset with Ichabod, who is kind of swooping in and distracting Katrina away from him. And in this movie too, we get a scene where Brom dresses up as the Horseman in order to try to scare Ichabod away. However, in this film, it does not work and Ichabod sticks around. And also in this 99 movie, Brom Bones ends up dying. He tries to fight the real Headless Horseman, and he ends up being killed. And in the book, we learn about this like old, slow, funny looking horse that a farmer lets Ichabod borrow. And Ichabod, again, he's very gangly and he's not an attractive man. And so the way he's described riding this like funky looking horse, they just make quite a sight. And so there is talk of this horse in the book, and then we have him in the movie as well. And fun fact, Johnny Depp adopted this horse in real life after they filmed this movie. And Ichabod is a bit of a scaredy cat in the book, and we see that in the movie as well. Like, he's very brave in some ways, and yet at the same time he can be very easily frightened. And in the book, as said, Ichabod believed in like all the supernatural things, whereas in the film Ichabod is a firm disbeliever. However, he does have knowledge of the occult to some extent because his mom is a witch in the movie. And then there is also a prominent tree talked about in the book. It is this landmark in Sleepy Hollow, but it's also part of like the ghost stories they tell involve this tree, and there's like a wailing and things, and there's like a major part of the Revolutionary War who had been hung at that tree, and so it becomes part of the Sleepy Hollow ghostly lore. And we have a tree in the film too that is a very important part of the story. It is actually underneath this tree where the Hessian is buried in the movie. And yeah, the Horseman, like I just said, he is a Hessian soldier, same as we hear in the short story. And in the end of the movie, they are running away from the Headless Horseman. And in this scene, we get a few things that happen that mirror things that happened in the cartoon, because in the cartoon, when he's running away from the Headless Horseman, Ichabod hits his head on a tree, which causes him to flip and land on the Headless Horseman's horse. And that happens in the movie as well. And then in the cartoon, we also get a scene where he lands on a horse backwards, and so he's riding it backwards. And we also get that in the film. And so I just loved how they include these different moments as reference to the cartoon. And the same goes for when Brom is dressed up as the Horseman. That scene also has some similarities with the cartoon. But to get into the plot of the 99 movie, so Ichabod Crane, he is our main character. However, here he is not a school teacher. He is instead an investigator who lives in New York City, and he is sent to Sleepy Hollow to investigate 3 deaths that have occurred where all of the bodies have been found with their heads chopped off. And he has these new ideas as to how to deduce the culprit and cause of death, but the city has no interest in his methods, and that is why they send him to Sleepy Hollow. And he also wants to perform autopsies, but at the time, cutting up a dead body was seen as barbaric. So no one has any interest in these new ideas he has. And so they're just like, oh, like, go experiment in Sleepy Hollow. Don't try to push this on us here in New York City. And once he is in Sleepy Hollow, he is a skeptic, so he doesn't believe that like some ghost horseman is killing people. However, before long, he finds out that a ghost horseman really is the one killing people. However, he also realizes that there is a human controlling the horsemen, and so there is a human culprit after all. And in the movie, Katrina Van Tassel, she has a stepmother, and we learn that the stepmother, Lady Van Tassel, she saw the Hessian horseman when he was killed, when she was a little girl. And when this happens, she sells her soul and she steals his skull in order to use him to get revenge on people in Sleepy Hollow who caused her family to live a life of poverty in the woods and caused her mom to die soon after they had to move to the woods. And so she is the one after the Van Tassel fortunes. And so she's having the horseman kill those who wronged her, but she's also having him kill people who are in the way of her inheriting the fortune. And in the end, Ichabod is able to return the skull to the horseman, and the horseman then takes Lady Van Tassel with him as he rides back into his grave. And this movie was threatened to be given an NC-17 rating because there is a scene where the horseman kills a family, a father, a mother, and their very young son. And while the death of the child is off screen, they showed the horseman putting the head in his sack before riding off. But the movie cut this moment because seeing the child's head is what was going to cause them to get an NC-17 rating. And most people, including myself, when I saw this for the first time, are very shocked that the child is killed by the Headless Horseman. But it's funny because Tim Burton, he specifically made sure to have this happen because he is quoted as saying that he always hated it in movies when kids were treated differently and they would be spared. And so he was like, no, that's not happening in my movie. Like, we are going to make sure the child dies. And I do think this was a good call because not only is it surprising and like shocking, but also from here on out, it feels like anything could happen, right? Like no one is safe from the Headless Horseman. And in the book and cartoon, but especially the book, the Headless Horseman is in such a small portion of the story, which was such a disappointment. And so I love that the movie, like right off the bat, the Horseman is prominently featured. Like the first scene we get is him killing someone, and then he shows up very early on throughout the entire movie. And so I think that was such a smart decision. And then also to turn this into a feature film, they also had to add a lot to the story. And again, I think they did a great job at really putting their own twist on this tale, while at the same time including a lot of elements that stay true to the original story, or at least like reference it in some way. And then including those scenes that reference the cartoon too, I thought was just really fun. And in general, this movie, yeah, it's just so fun while also being tense and scary. And I have seen this movie a number of times in the last 20 years, and I know it very well. And yet, when I went to go watch it in preparation for this video, I was totally engrossed the whole time, and I had no desire to pick up my phone. And so, yeah, you're just like so engaged right off the bat, and it has great pacing. And so you're never bored, and the time just flies by while you're watching this. And I love the costumes here. Johnny Depp looks really good in his 18th century getup. And then the dresses that the women wear were also beautiful. And then the practical effects were fantastic. Like there were so many scenes that were just like so gross and unsettling and scary. And that tree of the dead, which is where the Horseman is buried, that was definitely... Sorry. Our cute little kitten was climbing up my pants just now. Anyway, this is Chloe. We got her so our other cat would have a friend. But yeah, isn't she so pretty? Anyway, back to the Tree of the Dead. That freaked me out so much when I was a kid, when he's like hacking it and like, yeah, all of the heads inside the tree. So gross, but so effective. And same with Christopher Walken. He plays the Headless Horseman. He doesn't have any dialogue, but he just looks so creepy with his filed teeth. And so yeah, the production was just fantastic with this movie. And the movie just like oozes that Halloween atmosphere that you want. And so it is just the perfect movie to get into the spooky season. And when it comes to book versus movie, the movie wins, the 99 film. I do really like the cartoon, which I had totally forgotten that Bing Crosby narrates the cartoon. That kind of surprised me. But I do love the cartoon, and of course it's great for kids. But the 99 movie, I do have a lot of nostalgia for it. But I think even if this was my first time ever watching it, I think I still would have loved it. And I would have just had so much fun watching it, you know? Whereas, yeah, the book, it was disappointing for a number of reasons. It wasn't quite as atmospheric in the Halloween spooky way as I wanted. But also the writing style was just really weird. And I will say that this book has been reprinted many, many times in the last 200 years. And so there are different versions of this you can read. And so the first version I read, yeah, the wording was just so odd. And I've read plenty of books from the 1800s, but this one, I don't know if they were typos or what, but it was just worded so weird. And I'm going to share a quote. And this is from a scene when Ichabod is at the Van Tassel home and he's thinking how like, ooh, one day this could all be mine. And we read, he emerges a kind of grateful creature, whose coronary heart dilated and share as his skin come to be entire of suitable cheer, and whose spirit rose with consuming, as some men's do with drink. He couldn't assess too, rolling his huge eyes spherical him as he ate, and chuckling with the possibility that he would possibly ultimately be lord of all this scene, and honestly not feasible highly priced in beauty. So I don't know if those are typos in the book that I was reading, but that is how it was printed. And so I just had a hard time getting into the book because I'm just like, what is he saying right now? And why is it worded so weird? I don't know if this is how it was originally published or what, but yeah, I did get another edition of this book. And the second version of this book, it was an abridged version, but it was also worded differently, so it was easier to understand. So yeah, if you have read this book, let me know what the wording was like in the version that you read. But despite my complaints, I wouldn't discourage someone from reading this. I wouldn't not recommend it because I am glad that I have finally read this story, and yet at the end of the day, the movie wins. And I feel like the Headless Horseman, Dracula, and Frankenstein are like the three biggest Halloween monsters, and I have now covered all three. I did Frankenstein in 2022, I did Dracula in 2023, and now I've done Sleepy Hollow. So make sure you check out my Dracula video and my Frankenstein video if you have not yet already, and make sure you share your thoughts on the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow and Ichabod Crane down below in the comments, and do not forget to like and subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you next time. Bye.